Now we'll hear from the Honorable Steve Daines from Montana.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for inviting me here to testify. As I sit before the Budget Committee this morning, I'm reminded of the reason I decided to run for Congress. It wasn't because I was having a midlife crisis. Rather, I realized the severity of our national financial crisis and the damaging impact it will have on my kids and my grandkids if responsible action is not taken today. Our federal budget has been balanced just 5 times in the past 50 years. This practice has resulted in our present $16 trillion plus debt, and it's simply unsustainable. I come to Washington with a little different resume. I spent the last 28 years in the private sector. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer. And I know firsthand how important it is not only to balance the budget, which in the private sector, that's just breaking even, but actually creating surpluses. That's called a profit in the private sector. Balancing is not enough. You actually have to generate more income than you spend. Debt wears down any potential for growth, and a business will ultimately collapse under its pressure. Further, I was motivated by competition and the competitive forces of the free market. When I was in the private sector, I woke up every morning knowing that if I didn't give 100% effort and find ways to deliver value to our customers, to be innovators, to continuously find ways to do more with less, our competitors would beat us. The companies that I worked for were held accountable for results we produced. That is far different than what we have here in Washington with a spend it or lose it mentality as it comes to managing the finances, and it's unfortunately very prevalent across this institution. Balancing the budget, demanding accountability, demanding results, promoting efficiency. These principles are at the core of the success in the private sector. They're also championed and adhered to by the people of Montana, which I represent. And I believe it's time to bring these common sense principles back to Washington. I would also like to highlight that I believe the federal government fundamentally has a spending problem. It's not a revenue problem. As you know, the Congressional Budget Office released a study last month that found that our federal revenues will exceed the 40-year average next year and will remain above that average throughout the next decade. This will occur even if Congress does not raise a single dollar in new taxes. I strongly support reforming our tax code to make it simpler, to make it fairer, and to promote economic growth, but I believe this should be done in a revenue-neutral fashion. Federal spending, on the other hand, will remain above historic averages throughout the next decade. As all of you know, the growth in entitlement spending is the primary driver of this unsustainable spending and our escalating debt crisis. We must enact cost-saving reforms to these programs to preserve them for future generations without weakening the critical services provided to today's beneficiaries. I have 2 grandmothers, each are 94 years old, that depend on their Medicare and their Social Security. This is not about touching what grandma gets. This is about ensuring that my 4 kids will have something when they retire. Lastly, as a Congress, I believe we too need to be motivated. I supported the no budget, no pay legislation passed in January, and am pleased it appears to have motivated the Senate to take up a budget for the first time in 4 years. I believe we need to take this principle even one step further, and this goes back to perhaps my private sector instincts, by tying it to a balanced budget and making the performance for pay standard permanent. I recently introduced the Balanced Budget Accountability Act, which would terminate member pay after April 15th if our respective chamber does not pass a budget that maintains a glide path to balance by fiscal year 2023. That's the idea of balance the budget within 10 years. In the private sector, if you don't produce results, you don't get paid. I think it's about time that Congress should be no different than the way it operates out in the free markets in the private sector. Thank you again for inviting me to testify. I look forward to working with the Budget Committee as we work to balance the budget and invigorate job creation and economic growth for this country. I yield back my time.